All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am thrilled to welcome you to today's session, where we will be talking about the Housing Development Consortium's Sustainable Buildings Initiative, which really works towards advancing sustainability in how affordable housing is constructed, as well as in our innovation. For those of you that I do not know in this room, I am Patience Malaba, and I have the incredible honor of being the Executive Director of the Housing Development Consortium. We do have a very fantastic panel pulled together for you today with 4 critical perspectives that you will hear from. We have a development perspective, we have a building performance perspective, we have a decarbonization specialist, we also have a funder. And these are folks that you will be hearing from in terms of their experience with our program and the work that we've done. Now, I'm going to do some context setting, starting off with the fact that the folks you see here in Dave Reddy, who is the building performance consultant and principal at O'Brien 360. And then we have Joel Ng, who is a developer and principal at Edge Developers. And then we do have Kimberly Lowen, who's a decarbonization specialist at Elevate. And then we do also have a funder in Jess at Enterprise Community Partners, who serves as the Senior Programs Director. And what's exemplified in all of this work is the importance of collaboration. And I will dive into that in a little bit. But before that, I want to set some context that we are in a time of explosive growth. We are in a time of unprecedented housing inequity and the continued increased challenges of climate change. And it is fundamentally important as we do this work that we acknowledge as a state, as a region in different parts of the state, that we have a dual crisis. We have an affordable housing crisis that continues to grow, and we have a need to address climate change. And it behooves us that in all the work that we do, that we recognize the nexus and be able to work in that space for us to effectively move solutions forward. Now, we all know navigating the delicate balance between energy efficiency, sustainability, and cost containment is difficult for any developer. It is especially complex for affordable housing owners who are committed to producing high-quality, affordable housing, and yet you are existing in a space of limited capital and operating budgets. So it is a tension to hold. It is one that requires a vision and commitment to get us there. We know there's a lot of expectations in our ecosystem on affordable housing across the board. Affordable housing developers are expected to produce as many units as you can, and rightfully so. We are in a point of need in our state. There is an expectation to adapt to the ever-changing codes and regulations across the board. And some of our codes right now are outpacing the technology that we have. So that's a high expectation that continues to exist. And there's a big question of how do we contain cost in a time when construction costs have skyrocketed as they have. And overall, we know in the existing portfolio, there is a commitment by all of you to be sure that the portfolio you hold is high quality. You're recruiting and retaining staff, and you're doing all of this with spiraling maintenance costs and insurance costs that we won't get into in this conversation. But these are all challenges that you are holding together. And in doing so, at the nexus of affordable housing and climate change, we've got to recognize that we have a need for more homes. We need 1 million more homes over the next 20 years in Washington state. So how do we continue to produce at that scale while we're holding on to the commitment of being more sustainable and environmentally healthy? We have a population growth that will continue to grow, and we have regulatory frameworks that continue to be more fragmented across communities. And how can we get them to be more aligned to support the production of housing? We know it's hard work. It's not lost on us. But we know that when we come together and collaborate, we can do so much more. And that's what the work of HDC on the Sustainable Buildings Program has shown. And I want to make a couple of acknowledgements. First, I want to acknowledge my predecessor in Marty Koistra, who's in the room. Marty, if you could stand, for his visionary leadership. Marty began this work while he was with us at HDC. We're building on this foundation, we're scaling and continuing to grow on this legacy of how do we sustainably build affordable housing, and now we're beginning to ask the other bigger question of how do we make existing portfolio be more sustainable. I also want to acknowledge our team at HDC and Lauren Tenney and HDC staff who've poured in time and hours investing and supporting this work. We also have extraordinary volunteer support from Mark Deutsch, who I know is not here, so in absentia acknowledging his work, but there's been hundreds of thousands of hours by volunteers, including one just for this very session by Becky Bicknell at Walsh, who pulled this session together. Please, a round of applause for Becky. All this to say, with collaboration, we truly understand that we can come together to design high-performance buildings. We can come together to prepare for stricter codes, more stringent codes that continue to outpace technology, as I mentioned earlier. And we can together preserve affordability as we retrofit existing buildings. And we have a panel with us today that will discuss some of the lessons we've learned on this journey and how we've worked together, what we've assessed as the most promising practices, what we continue to think about as the next tier and next steps for the work within HDC. So with that, here's how we're gonna roll. We will have first Dave Reddy, who will talk us through the Exemplary Buildings Program, which was truly a collaborative effort of not just the partners that you see listed here. We have public funders who invested resources with incentives to support our demonstration projects, and that leadership really got us to some results. And then following Dave, we will have Joel Ng, who will come in and speak from a developer perspective, how a project has actually gone through and is an example of lessons that we can draw from. And then we'll be followed by Kimberly Lewin, who will bring in the decarbonization perspective. How do we decarbonize the existing portfolio that we have? And then finally, we cannot do this work without the resources. Without the funding, it becomes impossible, and we do have a funder among us in Jess Blanche, who will close us off in the presentation. So with that, I will hand over to Dave Reddy.
Thanks so much, Patience. I'm going to be speaking about the Exemplary Buildings Program. So this is an initiative that started back in 2018, 2019, and brought together an amazing group of people, volunteers, to start outlining the specifications for building high-performance, new construction, affordable housing. Recognizing that where we are starting from, which is a building, so I'm showing here a pie chart of energy use for a typical multifamily building, and just kind of the breakdown of the different end uses, as we call them, in terms of energy use intensity. So basically kind of like in a miles per gallon for the building. And you can see there's a couple of large chunks of the energy use of a building, space heating being one, and water heating. And we envisioned what these specifications would do on the performance of buildings, and trying to reduce in key areas, and really across the board as much as possible, improve the performance of these buildings by instituting new efficient technologies, better design practices, construction practices, and demonstrate that in new construction buildings. So to build this out, we identified a couple of key focus areas, and worked as a group to collaborate together, charrette out what's the right balance of performance specifications in these various areas, ranging first and foremost, identifying that early integrative design is key to the success of incorporating these strategies. So talking about it early with your design team, your contractor, your owner, identify the priorities, find the right balance, and work together and make sure those requirements are built in. But then more technical aspects, exterior wall assemblies, focusing on newer technologies that were coming through the codes and other areas, balanced ventilation with heat recovery. This is just in the last 5 years has become standard in our new construction. But when we started this project, it was not. There were very few examples of new developments that incorporated that. So we felt this was an area we needed to build out more information and guidelines. Water heating is another one. This is when we started again. Using heat pumps for water heating was not commonplace yet. So another great area for focus. And also focusing on solar and how to also find the right healthy materials to incorporate in our building. So in all these subject areas, we drafted some specs and kind of straw specs that everybody kind of coalesced around, really worked through them all to add more detail and find the right balance through the charrettes. We had workshops to distill that down to what we felt was the right balance, and built out technical resources, guideline documents to provide owners, engineers, information on how to do this, incorporate these new technologies into buildings. All this exists on the HGC website, and everything that we're doing, particularly in this demonstration projects, as I'll talk about, is to implement it, learn from it, and then feed back to what is the right balance on these specifications in terms of costs, in terms of return on investment. Maintenance and operations is a huge consideration. What are we learning about maintaining these new systems? So over time, we will be updating our specifications as we go and trying to share those out. So I'm going to talk about the 5 demonstration projects that were part of the Exemplary Buildings program. It's a pretty interesting cross-section of different building types, from cooperative home ownership to permanent supportive housing. 2 of them are completed, and there's 2 more that will be completed this year. Joel will be talking about Beacon Pacific Village, and we've been following these projects through, and a lot of these projects have taken different strategies, adopted different strategies, not necessarily incorporating everything that we recommended, but identifying pieces of it in some cases, or in one example, Hobson Place and SAMA pursuing FIAS certification, Passive House certification, so ultra high performance. And none of them are the same, but they're all sharing their knowledge, they're all committed to integrative design, and we're learning a lot from them. I'm going to drill in a little bit on Hobson Place because it's the project that was finished first in the cohort. It's an amazing project. It's 85 or 90 units of permanent supportive housing above a clinic in South Seattle, developed by DSC, and a great team that came together in the middle of design to adopt these new standards and adjust to, because there were some additional incentives available to pursue Passive House certification and exemplary buildings. Really, you can see to the far right, Hobson Place North, which is a building that was built first, to code and DSC spec, which is beyond code, but that was built first, and then this project came on and was pursuing passive house and exemplary buildings. And it was, instead of just taking the design from north and redoing it on the south, it was a completely new process, a new design, and it really kind of pushed everybody to work together to figure out how to get it done. And this picture, I think, is great because it really exemplifies the changes that were made and how much work it took to adopt some of the strategies. One, on the right side, you can see DSC had already incorporated using balanced ventilation with heat recovery into their projects for a couple buildings. But one of the things that was standard practice was putting all the ductwork out on the roof. There is a lot of ductwork in these systems, but that doesn't work for passive house, I can tell you. You have to bring all that ductwork within the building envelope for performance reasons. And when you do that, it's amazing how much room you free up for the solar in this particular project. And just how clean the roof is and how much solar could be supported because of that change and the efficiency that we're seeing from the higher performance systems. So this is data that really demonstrates kind of the step changes and what can be done when you pursue these. So on the first column was the kind of typical design for permanent supportive housing 10 years ago, building to code, using natural gas for water heating and space heating, and then moving to using balanced ventilation with heat recovery, but still using gas for water heating, and then finally hops in place. So a real kind of clear step change in performance. This is in terms of site energy use, and then just how it corresponds to some of the existing clean buildings targets that are out there. There is not a target for multifamily yet, but the one that some people have talked about because of the early adopter program, it exceeds that target. So, and then when you look at emissions, site-based emissions, operational emissions, it's an incredible step change, right? It's switching, it's an all-electric building using city light power, which is largely carbon neutral. So in terms of emissions, operational emissions, it's a clear standout. And again, it falls under Seattle's building performance standard. So just a slide with the resources that you can go to the website and find all our guidelines and presentations and case studies. It's a great resource for anybody who's looking to learn more about the projects. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to you, Joel.
So I'm going to talk about project. So first of all, as a developer, and when we started Beacon Pacific Village, I'll explain where it is here. For those of you that know Seattle, there's the Beacon Pacific Tower there in the back. It's on very North Beacon Hill. I think you all can see it. We're on I-5, so it's pretty visible, very visible. Former Amazon building. And so when we came into this project with SCIPTA, our partner, SCIPTA, Seattle Chinatown International District PDA, I'm with Edge Developers, and so we were kind of co-developers. We're special limited partner on the project. It was already had a MUP. It was envisioned as a different project, and Frank Chop, former representative, well, he's still representative, but he was really instrumental in making this all affordable. And then as we stepped into it, I remember, I think early on, and I'll say this right up front, as just a developer trying to work through tax credits, and we had 13 different capital stacks in this project, which is over $100 million. Throwing exemplary building into it wasn't exactly top of the list. It's another foreign language. It took me a couple years to learn the LHTC language, and so for us to do this, I will say HTC Marty was really instrumental in saying, listen, and David and others, they're very, and I say this from a layman's perspective, is that they were very accommodating. It was very clear that they're very just passionate about this, and it continues today. So there's resources. I guess the point here is there's resources out there. It's still a bit of a foreign language to me, but I will tell you from our perspective, this is how we approached it and decided that we did want to be one of the first 4 exemplary building projects, first one of 4, because we already knew that our project was very expensive. But I'll kind of walk you through our decision making and what we have, some of the elements we have at the project. So just a little quick background about the project. So we serve Seattle Chinatown International. SCIPTA is mainly in the CID, Chinatown International District, and so serves a very concentrated a population that has a history of being displaced and being moved around. This project, the Beacon Pacific Village, is a family-oriented project. We have 3 and 4 bedrooms. So our first thing that we really held on to in going to public funders is that we wanted 4-bedroom. So 4 bedrooms are pretty unusual, but that was something we wanted in our project. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but some of the takeaways is, and this is what we know, is we wanted 4 bedrooms because there's multi-generational families in our project. There's often a grandparent with the grandkids, and so we just needed the extra space. So just setting it up that ours was truly a family project. It's a family project that we held on to, and it was one that we, again, public funders said they want family housing, but when it comes to measuring their investment, it's often on a per unit basis. So you say, oh, how many units do we get out of X dollars? And we like to kind of change that by saying it should really be bedrooms. It shouldn't be units, it should be bedrooms, is really the true measure. And so we had a separate presentation some years ago by saying more than a unit count was really our statement. And so some of the conditions of our property, and so this is where we pivoted and started to really do the research and say, you know, this makes sense to do exemplary building for a couple reasons. One, and again, I won't go through all of this and I won't test anyone, but cost burden. It's in a very cost burden neighborhood. Displacement is very high. And then where it really ties into the nexus to exemplary building is the environmental exposures. So again, if you know where Pacific Medical Tower is, it's at the nexus of I-90 and I-5. So it's the end of an interstate highway. It comes and intersects with I-5, another north-south highway we all know about. There is real pollution that emits up to this. This is just perched right above the nexus of these 2 highways. The other thing is it's on North Beacon Hill, and it is in the flight path of SeaTac. So I clearly remember when we spoke to one of the funders who will remain nameless, but when we said we're going to do exemplary building, I could hear them fold their arms. I could hear them exhale and say, because it means more money. But when we presented the data and we dug in and we said, listen, let's see if the next slide. Well, here's the site. Again, I think namely at the bottom left is the building, and I'll say 2 hours ago we just got our TCO, so it's good timing. We just got our TCO on the project. So again, you can see it upper left. Down here is the site. So there used to be a parking lot, surface parking lot. Just go through this building A, building 160 units, family project. Building A on the right there, it's building A. The blue to the right there is going to be our building B, if you will. It'll be our second building in the next few years once the funders give us money. So one thing we mentioned to the funders were we have the data, very clear data in the 90th percentile from pollution, from displacement, from education, from even diversity. And then when we laid it out, again, what I just said, when it's the nexus of I-5 and I-90, and then in the flight path, and there's plenty of data out there with any project next to freeways, the level of pollution is very high. I could hear them nodding their heads over the phone. I could hear them nodding their heads, and they said, okay, it starts to make sense. So at that point, we did go all in and say, okay, we're going to do this. It makes a lot of sense. We want to move forward with it. So just again, noise pollution here, environmental exposure, and some of the effects. So again, some of the data which I mentioned, 3 and 4 bedrooms. The second bullet point, this is where in a neighborhood where pollution is worse than 90% of the state, with hazardous waste materials, 98%, diesel, traffic and volume at 97%. So some of the standards we put in our project was, again, some of this less, the EUIs, less than 20 EUIs, 40% better than the 2015 baseline. We have central water heaters that are all electric, individual unit ERVs, which are energy recovery ventilators. First time I had ever heard of them, but they're becoming more commonplace now. Triple glaze, so when we give tours of the project, we open up the windows and we close it because they're triple pane and glazed windows, and it's very quiet. And then solar panels on the roof. So the cost premium, everyone says, how much more was it? So our project, just the baseline construction cost, which is a shade under $70 million. And it was roughly about a 1.5, you can't really see it down here, 1.5 million was the rough estimate in the premium for these added features. Oh, I think I went backwards. So some of the key takeaways, and I have to thank David for putting this slide together for me, but the first one definitely, I think I spoke to, some of the early commitments. And so our team, in addition to those that assisted us, our architectural team, Weber Thompson was architect, really bought in. And they did have, since we didn't have the shreds early on, they had to pivot on a lot of their design. And they were more than willing to do this and really understood the importance of doing this. So we kind of, dug in and really worked, because it's, you just don't add it. Like the ERVs was a bit of a, working with the contractor MARPAC as well, really had to redesign some of the features of what was already designed in our units. So also, once, of course, the important thing is once the project's running, is start to measure, to take measurements and really have management, ownership and management. The management will, when I say management, is property managers or third parties, they're gonna follow what the owner wants. So SCIPTA really is who's managing this on a day-to-day. They're all in as well. And so, count for the benefits to also the tenants. And so I was looking, we're starting to pre-lease, and one thing I'd mentioned to the property management team was, let's put on the front page the exemplary building, some of the standards that are there. Because we just talked about the normal things, but if we talk about the benefits to your family and your kids, it just makes sense. Why hide it in the second page where it can get lost? And even if it just swings the opinion of a small percentage, you start educating and you start becoming, the information starts getting out there. So we want to put this on the front page by really demonstrating what this means, and maybe have an asterisk to another page explaining in more detail for those who are interested. Again, measuring, and so the third bullet point, the code, I'll just read it because it's a little bit foreign language to me, but code now covers many aspects of exemplary building. When we started, it did not. Still gaps, and especially in the area of envelope performance, hot water distribution, and duct leakage. All this stuff is continuing to get better. David? Yes, I presume. Do you want to add anything there?
No, I think it's just, in general, it is a question that we get a lot, is a lot of this is code now, but we're still working on identifying where the code doesn't cover the real performance issues that we are learning from the exemplary building. So there's still opportunity. It's not all code covered by code yet. That's
great. All right, thank you. And then account for impact on utility allowances, which impacts the residents. And so, maybe doing a third-party utility allowance which really shows the benefit. We have, for those that know how we do this in putting a pro forma together, we have to net out a stated utility allowance for all our residents, but can we exceed that so they have more savings? And that would be a great goal. So I think that's it. So, Kimberly.
Hey everyone, is everyone still awake? I know it's like that mid-afternoon time. We're still digesting. But I'm very happy to be here and speak with you and be with this amazing panel. We're going to transition a little bit. First to state, my name is Kimberly Lowen. I work at Elevate, which is a nonprofit that works at the nexus of affordable housing, climate resiliency, and equity, specifically working in retrofitting multifamily affordable buildings. So we're going to switch a little bit to talk about decarbonization. And I want to just say that we heard a lot. We heard some mostly here from Joel on just that intersectionality of housing, climate, and equity. And patients started off with saying we need 1 million more homes in Washington. We need new construction. We want good, sustainable, equitable new construction. But we also need to be looking at our existing housing and how can we make sure that those in existing affordable housing have good, healthy conditions to live in as well. So I think we need to be holding both those things as we look at how can we look at solving this housing crisis and move forward as well with the climate and equity components of that as well. So I'm going to transition a little bit to talk about decarbonization in existing buildings. And so I just want to start, we talked a little bit about kind of the emissions in buildings, but just kind of ground ourselves in what are the climate impacts of our built environment, specifically buildings. And this is data from 2019, and this is global, which actually is pretty representative at least of the Puget Sound region. I'm not sure what it is across the Washington state, but generally mostly 40% of emissions come from buildings. So it is a really impactful place that we can address the climate impacts and address emissions. And mostly we're looking here at operating costs of buildings when we talk about that 40%. So we really can make a really impact on reducing emissions through addressing that specific operating costs in buildings. So just want to take a minute to talk about what do we mean by decarbonization, specifically in existing buildings. And really, this is about kind of 3 pillars that we look at least within the Elevate work that Elevate does. And those 3 are energy efficiency, making sure the building is most efficient as possible with envelope and performance. Looking at electrification, so how do we move from electrification? You saw those slides from David on the reduction. We went to all electric building and how that emissions reduced drastically. So from efficiency, most efficient, to electrification, and to renewables. So looking at all 3 of those pillars to decarbonize the building and reduce the emissions as much as possible. Some buildings may need all 3 of those components. Some buildings may need 1 or pieces of it. But really, how can we look at all 3 of these pillars and work on the decarbonization of our buildings? I do also just want to highlight, Joel touched on this as well, but just the additional benefits we get from decarbonization, not just from emissions standpoint, but in the lower left-hand corner, we can see we're looking at promoting healthy housing. Health conditions are really improved within the building for the tenants and residents. We can reduce energy burdens and utility costs for people if they are looking at how do we reduce our quality of life or increase our quality of life but reduce our cost of living. This is one way to do it. Further in climate actions, also it is good high-paying jobs, looking at how can we build out the workforce of the clean energy economy and create more jobs within this space as well. So a lot of added benefits to the decarbonization. So, as we know, we want to do this work. We need to do this work to look at this nexus of how we can address the housing, climate, and equity all together. And as we talked about, there are some new building performance standards. Seattle just passed their Seattle building emissions performance standard. And we also have Washington's new clean buildings codes. And so we're going to be working on seeing how we can implement this. But this is actually now a really, really important need for existing buildings and housing providers because they are going to be required to meet, at least within Seattle, a net zero by 2050 for their buildings that are over 20,000 square feet. And patients talked about this in the beginning, but housing providers, we all are stretched. There's a lot of different competing priorities. There's a lot of it going on. And so how can we best support building owners and housing providers in meeting this new requirement that they're going to have to meet, but also addressing the climate and also at the same time improving housing conditions for the tenants. So how can we come together and continue this collaboration that has been going on with the exemplary buildings program and new construction, and now bring this to existing buildings and helping meet these new building performance standards? So this kicked off a new initiative from HDC, who's convening a Decarbonize Affordable Housing Now task force, which we like to call DAWN. So we have been collaborating now for about a year and a half. Wow, I was like, time is passing quickly. It's been over a year. But we really now are bringing together and really extending and evolving from the exemplary buildings performance work that has been done on new construction, and coming together in a collaborative effort to kind of work on these 4 pillars you see on the screen. So the goal really of us coming together is, how can we grow the capacity of the affordable housing community to plan and implement retrofits to meet Seattle's new building emissions performance standard? How can we contribute to carbon neutral goals and really, again, improve the conditions of housing for residents? So part of this is really expanding the research and collaboration work that has already been continued. I'm just going to speak a little bit to the work that we've already started. We have started identifying some demonstration projects we'll talk about on the last slide. We are starting to look at providing the service of portfolio planning for housing providers, which really looks at larger housing providers that have large different buildings, and how do we actually look at what do we need to do, how are we going to get this work done? So what buildings do we need to start in? How are we going to do it? Where are we going to get the funding from? And when do we need to do this in terms of meeting the requirements? So helping larger portfolios figure out how do we actually approach this among all of our buildings and get this work done. And then we've also started 5 different working groups to really kind of dig into specific components of the support that we think the housing providers will need. And that is funding, which we're going to hear from Jess in a moment on that. Collaboration, looking at eligibility, technical requirements to meet the actual building performance standards, and then also technical assistance to really help the housing providers have a one-stop shop model to help them move through the process in this decarbonization process of their buildings. So I just wanted to put this slide up quick. This is a lot of the organizations, agencies, groups who have been a part of this DAWN task force already. We anticipate this to be expanding and growing, but at least just wanted to note that we've been convening and really having this be a space of co-creating and learning and growing together. So it's been fun. I will say that, it's been fun. And then I just wanted to close out before I pass it off to Jess to talk about funding, to just talk a little bit more about the demonstration projects. Just up on the slide here, we are really working towards finalizing agreements for 3 demonstration projects for DAWN. But just looking at the key criteria we've really looked at and really wanted to get some projects going, because that's the best way we can actually learn and actually demonstrate that this work can be done, so we can bring in more projects. But really looked at the available funding that we had, were projects ready, and then owner engagement were a lot of the pieces we looked at for these 3 projects, and we'll continue to expand that criteria. You can see on your right there, additional criteria we'll be exploring as we look to bring in more demonstration projects. So I'm gonna pass it off with that to Jess to talk a little bit about some new funding, exciting funding opportunities that will come that we're gonna be looking at utilizing to continue these projects.
Okay. So hi everybody, I'm Jess Blanche with Enterprise Community Partners, and I'm sort of your good news, bad news friend for the end of this presentation. So I'm here representing Power Forward Communities, which is a coalition of 5 nonprofit organizations that partnered up to apply for Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund grant money through the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's Enterprise, it's LISC, it's Habitat, so your big 3 intermediaries, as well as Rewiring America and United Way, and we all kind of have different specialties that we're focusing on within that. But just to give you a big picture and take a step back, so the Inflation Reduction Act has created a number of different funding opportunities. So this is just a glimpse at the constellation of funding that is available for building decarbonization and sort of generally our climate commitments that we're working on as a country. And then some tax credits, which I know a lot of people have been working on and getting frustrated with. And I will just say I know nothing about them, so please don't ask me any questions. You can ask John Clark in the back. You're welcome, John. So overall, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is divided up into 3 different chunks. So there's 14 billion, in the National Clean Investment Fund, the NCIF. So this is where Power Forward, you can see we're the smallest awardee of all of these in $2 billion. And then there's the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, or CCIA, which was $6 billion. And you can see up at the top all of the awardees, all of the sort of groups that are going to be sub-granting and lending this money are up at the top here. And then there's Solar for All. And I'll just say one of the things that's really important about all of this IRA funding is that it's meant to layer together. So the hope is that, by accessing capital from one funding partner, you're not eliminating the opportunity to access capital from another funding partner. And then I'll just spend a minute here. The government came up with a new acronym, surprise, surprise, and it's one that people in this kind of room are gonna have a hard time differentiating, so I've been told I have to really emphasize LIDAC. Low income and disadvantaged communities is not the same as LITEC, low income housing tax credits. So really the concept is that there's an initiative of President Biden's called Justice 40, where 40% of all of this investment is meant to go for low-income and disadvantaged communities. It's meant to serve those communities. All of the CCIA and Solar for All funding has to go to LIDAC communities. 40%, Justice 40 applies for the for the NCIF dollars. But Power Forward Communities is trying to maximize that as much as possible, with at least 75% of the funding going to LIDAC communities. And I'm not going to read all of these, and you can access these slides after the presentation. So your projects have to meet these 6 requirements to be able to qualify for any of the GGRF funding. So obviously reducing or avoiding greenhouse gas emissions and assisting communities to reduce or avoid such emissions. Reducing or avoiding emissions of other air pollutants, delivering additional benefits within one of the following: climate change, clean energy and energy efficiency, clean transportation, affordable and sustainable housing, training and workforce development, remediation and reduction of legacy pollution, development of critical clean water infrastructure. May not otherwise have been financed is a key point. Mobilizes private capital is another key point. And then supports commercial technologies. So then there's all these different kind of priority categories. We're gonna focus on the net zero emissions buildings. And there's sort of, the DOE has come up with a new definition, a standard that we can all agree on what a net zero emissions is. So highly efficient, electric only, clean power. Thank you for going through some of those before, so I didn't have to do it as much. And then another note around the federal requirements. So there's a lot of hefty federal requirements for getting this money. Chief among them is the Build America, Buy America Act, which basically the government's working on more and more definitions and help understanding what those are, and they'll be coming out with more information about that over time. But essentially the idea with all of these requirements that you should take home is that a project that may have already been required to use some of these is a better project to access greenhouse gas reduction funding than a project that otherwise wouldn't have needed Davis-Bacon, wouldn't have needed, Historic Preservation Act working with those, right? So if your project was otherwise easygoing without any of these, don't try to go for GGRF money because it'll just make things more complicated, right? So if you're already subject to some of these, then it might be a good idea. And so this is some of the principles that Power Forward communities are working towards when we're looking at projects. This is just Power Forward communities, but we're working, the concepts basically apply with the other grantees and the other funders. So it's worth kind of understanding what each of the different ones are. And again, we're all trying to coordinate to ensure that we're not complicating issues and making sure that you can stack funding and layer those. And then I think this is kind of a representation of less complicated to more complicated, more restrictions at the bottom right, and fewer requirements, I shouldn't say restrictions, requirements at the top left. We have renovations versus new construction. And then also least funding to most funding. So the least amount of funding is going to be in a rehab loan qualified project versus a net zero new construction is going to be eligible for more funding or be prioritized for more funding. One of the key things about retrofits, though, is that net zero over time is allowed. So the building does not have to be net zero at the initial retrofit that you're doing right now. It can be, as long as there's a plan to show net zero over a period of time, then that's going to be more beneficial for your project. Okay, so I think I said good news, bad news. I think a lot of people were like, IRA funds, it's going to fill all the holes in all the projects. It is not. And so I think it's really important that we temper expectations around how much money is going to be available for everyone's projects. Yes, this is a wonderful opportunity to finally fund all of these important decarbonization efforts that we are putting forward. And I think, honestly, us in the Pacific Northwest have been leading the way in doing a lot of this work. But it is not necessarily going to solve the problems of bigger gaps in projects that don't work otherwise financially. So reality check. But I'll just say this also that we're working on loan terms and we'll be opening up our pipeline in Q1 of next year. So the top QR code is to get on our email list so you can find out when the intake form to get on the pipeline is opened. And then if you are already working on decarbonization ideas for your projects, Enterprise working with RMI and HPN, Housing Partnership Network, and formerly Rocky Mountain Institute, now just RMI. We put together an affordable housing decarbonization hub. And one of the key components of what we're planning to do at Enterprise is a lot of technical assistance and helping folks understand all the different opportunities for funding, how you might layer them. And so there will be publicly available web tools. This is the first among those. And we'll be able to hopefully help you figure out how to make all these things work, I think along with our exemplary buildings friends. And then I should point out Lisa here from City Light, who came up to me after my last panel about utility incentives, that it would be worth connecting with City Light on. So I think it's important to know that there's lots of different opportunities to coordinate all of these different funding sources, and it's good to start early. It's not going to solve all the problems, but hopefully we're going to be making good progress. And I think one of the key things about staying sane in facing this climate crisis that we're in, as well as this housing crisis, is that we all need to just make steady impact and steady change. We may not solve it all by tomorrow, but with all of our efforts together, we're going to make a big impact. So I hope that that is helpful framing. Okay. So that's our presentation. I'll turn it back to Patience.
Thank you, Jess. $2 billion, and it is still not enough. So thank you for setting us up with the understanding of the financing options that exist, and many thanks to the panelists for sharing your insights. I would love, before turning it over to the audience, to announce that we do have sessions on the Inflation Reduction Act that will be a series. It's about 6 of them. See Lauren at the back as you walk out. They are starting off October 8th, October 9th, going through October, where we'll be breaking down these funding sources and really providing folks with technical details of how to get into flowing those resources directly to you. So making that plug, Lauren at HTC is going to be at the door putting out a flyer. With that, let's turn it over to you for questions.
Yeah, I'll come around with the mic, but I think I'm going to start with one from Huva that was for Jess. On the Power Forwards community financing, they asked if a project is not using LITEX, are there avenues to access the incentive tax credits or investment tax credits or 45L tax credits that were expanded through the IRA?
Well, I caveated my speech by saying I don't know anything about the tax credits at this point, so I'm going to defer to other experts who might be in this room or not in this room. But I think one of the key things is, and that I forgot to mention, is that any federal assistance in a project makes it infrastructure according to the Inflation Reduction Act, and that's a key definition when it comes to some of the funding availability and requirements. So it's worth understanding all of your funding sources.
Questions?
So a lot of, once BABA is triggered by whatever federal funding source you may have, opportunities around systems, sustainable systems like hot water heat pumps and other things like that get really difficult to meet with BABA. Is anybody, I've been trying to do some research on that, solar panels, other systems that meet the criteria, but are really hard to get BABA funding for. Anybody doing any research on that?
I can't say, I don't have a list, but there's certainly in the last 3 years been a number of manufacturers, US-based, that have brought like heat pump water heaters to the market that fill that niche. So it used to be offshore technology coming in, but now all the manufacturers are switching over to offer it. So at least in that area, I think you should find solutions.
Do you want to explain BABA for those that don't?
Oh yeah, well,
or maybe just
Buy
America, Build America.
Buy America, Build America.
So it's Build America, Buy America, and I think it's obviously an effort to ensure that some of the technology and manufacturing comes back on shore so that this money can be used in American communities and benefit, not only the construction projects and the people who are going to be living in those buildings, but also the economic development and workforce development. So that's sort of the goal. I think the lag in getting those things up to speed is the tricky part, but I'm hopeful that things will start moving quickly. But again, I don't have a crystal ball to tell you like when all these things are going to be online, unfortunately.
And I don't have much to add, other than we have a project in Pierce County, and we thought we would have to follow the BABA as well. So the contractor we're working with said, well, let me dive into this because this is all new for us. And the clear takeaway, it's going to be more expensive, similar to when you do prevailing wage or even Davis-Bacon, it starts narrowing the field because less contractors and subcontractors are either informed about it or willing to do it. So always the first couple years are the most difficult, and kind of what Jess was saying, it's, there's gonna have to be, unfortunately, it sounds like you're following under it now, so tell us in 6 months where you fall out, because we don't know.
Next year's Housing Washington. And I'll just add that I think this, along with public investment in affordable housing and why we have these requirements is it's a good investment in public benefit, right? These dollars are going to public benefit and they're going to be invested in American communities. And that's really an amazing side extra, maybe not even extra, maybe just sort of ground floor benefit of that requirement. So while it may be a bit of a brain breaker for us now, I think the more we can show the demand and get that happening, the better off we will all be moving forward.
And I think even the more important that as we hit 2025, we are ready to get those resources out of the door. There's another question. If there's no question in the room, go ahead, Whitney, and then we'll move to a question online.
I had a question about Dawn. How do you choose your projects, especially this initial batch? And is there room for recommendations?
Yeah, can we put that slide back up or not? Is that possible? Can I go back? I mean, I can speak to it, but I also just like to read it to see. We used about 3 to 4 different criteria for the initial 3 demo projects, and also David, feel free to grab the mic, because David's been very pivotal in helping select these 3 projects. But it really was about some funding that the city had. So there were certain criteria that we wanted to use by the end of this year and have allocated that Seattle City Office of Sustainable and Housing had available. So we wanted to make sure we're using that funding that was available and what other funding we had, and so the project needed to match that specific eligibility. We also wanted to jump in right away, so it was really about owner engagement, project readiness. Can we actually allocate the money now? And then wanted to make sure the project could meet Seattle BEPS. And so that was the main things we looked at for the next 3. We will be looking at additional criteria in terms of equitable impacts, like the social and economic racial equity impacts, like the slides that Joel showed on disparities in the city, so where the project's located, and we'll continue to look at the impacts of like the emission reductions as we move forward in selecting more projects.
Context on Dawn is that we worked on shaping the building emissions performance standards policy as we were establishing the program. So it's truly intended to then go ahead and implement the policy that we passed. We are right at time, and I will ask that you continue your discussions as we get out of here, but I want to thank the panelists for your great insights. And remind all of us once again that we are tackling the affordable housing challenge that has an overlap crisis with climate change. And in any ways that we can continue to work at that nexus effectively, it is possible through collaboration and innovation. And with that, thank you all for being here.